Welcome to The Explainer. We're about to trace a really dark path through history, one that starts not in 1930s Europe like you might think, but decades earlier in the deserts of Africa. So when we ask about the origins of the Holocaust, our minds, they almost always jump straight to 1930s Germany, right? But what if the ideological seeds, the very first steps, were planted much, much earlier? Based on some pretty serious academic work, we're going to explore a truly chilling connection. The idea that the first genocide of the 20th century, in what's now Namibia, wasn't just some forgotten tragedy. No, it was actually a crucial training ground for the horrors that came later. Okay, so first things first, let's establish what we're really talking about here. This isn't just some loose comparison. We're looking at a forgotten genocide that historians are now re-examining for its direct and, frankly, disturbing link to later events. You know, it's pretty powerful to remember that the word genocide itself, it was only created in 1944 to describe the Holocaust. But what historians have realized is that another event, 40 years before, fits this terrible definition perfectly. In Germany's official recognition back in 2021, that was way more than just a symbolic gesture. It really forces us to look back at what happened in 1904 and confront the echoes we find there, echoes that just reverberated through the rest of the century. So, what exactly happened in what was then German Southwest Africa? To get the connection, we have to first understand the crime itself. Just look at this timeline. In January of 1904, you have a revolt against colonial rule. By October, we're talking just a few months later, the response has escalated from a military campaign into an official order for total annihilation. This stopped being about suppressing a rebellion. It became something else entirely. And this is the order itself, the Vernichtungsbefehl. And that literally translates to extermination order. I mean, there is zero ambiguity, absolutely no room for interpretation. It's a written, official declaration of genocidal intent. Plain and simple. The result was absolutely catastrophic. An estimated 80% of the entire Herero population was wiped out. In total, you're looking at up to 100,000 Herero and 10,000 Nama people killed, many of them just driven into the desert to die of thirst. So the big question is, how on earth did a brutal colonial war in Africa become a kind of blueprint for Nazi ideology? Well, the connection is found in two core concepts that started as theories, but were put into horrific practice for the very first time in Namibia. So you've got this idea of Lebensraum, or living space. For a while, it was just an academic theory, but Namibia is where it became a brutal, deadly reality. It set a precedent that you don't just conquer a people, you can actually remove them, eliminate them, to seize their land for your own. That was a radical and terrifying new step. And the second pillar was something called Rassenhygiene, racial hygiene. This incredibly dangerous, pseudo-scientific belief in racial purity wasn't just some abstract idea being debated. No, in the African colony, it was treated like an applied science, a tool to justify and enforce absolute control. And this table, it just lays out the continuity so brilliantly. You can draw a straight line from the race theories, the need for living space, and the so-called science used in Namibia, straight to their later, more radicalized forms in Nazi Germany. What was tested out on a colonial stage was later scaled up and applied with industrial precision back in Europe. But this connection, it goes way beyond just abstract ideas. The Namibian genocide also created a practical blueprint, a set of tools and methods for mass destruction that would tragically be used again. I mean, this is just startlingly direct. The colonial government created a legal precedent for racial segregation that was echoed almost word for word 30 years later in the infamous Nuremberg laws. And this is another crucial piece of that blueprint. We think of concentration camps and we think of the Nazis, but they didn't invent them. The concept was already a tool of colonial warfare, and on a place called Shark Island, the Germans refined it into a true death camp. These camps became these gruesome laboratories, and if you just look at this list, it's like a horrifying preview of what was to come. Extermination through labor, deliberate starvation, even medical experiments on prisoners. These would all become signature features of the Nazi camp system. And this might be the most chilling direct link of all. It shows how the actual personnel, the knowledge, and the so-called scientific justification passed directly from the colonial project right into the hands of the architects of the Holocaust. So all of this evidence, the shared ideology, the laws, the methods, even the people involved, it all leads us to this central and very debated question. Was Namibia actually a dress rehearsal for the Holocaust? Now, scholars are really careful here. While the connections are undeniable, they also point out some huge differences in scale, in technology, and in motive. The Holocaust's industrial machinery, the gas chambers, and its global, almost cosmic ambition, that was unique. So if it wasn't a direct rehearsal, then what was it? Well, the consensus among many historians is that it created a permissive framework. Think of it this way. It wasn't a script that was reenacted, but it broke fundamental moral and legal barriers. It proved that the unthinkable was, in fact, possible, which made it that much easier for a future generation to justify even greater horrors. So finally, why does drawing this dark line from one part of the past to a more familiar, more studied part of the past, why does that matter for us today? Because it normalized race science. It pioneered the use of camps to control and eliminate entire populations. And it proved that the concept of Lebensraum could be achieved through total annihilation. It really was the first deadly experiment. You see, connecting these two histories doesn't take away from the unique horror of the Holocaust. If anything, it helps us understand how such an event ever became conceivable in the first place. It's a stark reminder to pay attention to the warning signs and to really think about the devastating consequences when the precursors to catastrophe are ignored.